What constitutes ethical business behavior? What does it mean to do the right thing? In a world that regularly stretches the limits of truth and fairness, could the answer to these questions hold the key to personal and professional success? Now for this week's main program, it's my pleasure to introduce featured speaker today, Patrick Galvin. Patrick's been involved with Rotary since 1989. After graduating from the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, Patrick received a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship to study history and political science at the University of São Paulo, Brazil. He's been a member of the Rotary Club of Portland for a decade and is currently president of its charitable trust. He leads the Galvanizing Group, a learning and development company that helps build high-performance teams and better relationships that increase sales and performance. He's presented many keynotes in business relationship building companies across the US and around the world. And in 2020, he delivered a well-received Rotary-related TEDx Talk entitled, "Should Self-Interest Motivate Service?" Seeing that video is what led me to reach out to Patrick and have him participate in a recent First 5 Rotary Club webcast where he was a featured speaker, and that led to him joining today's program. He's also an author who's written 2 business parable books that incorporate principles that Rotarians will recognize. His newest book, The Trusted Way, a story about building a life of business and character, is the only business parable about the 4-way test. I read the book and I really enjoyed the story. It was exciting to see these Rotary values retold in a modern and fast-paced way. Not only do I recommend it, I think it's another way to introduce your friends and colleagues to Rotary concepts and potential membership. Please welcome Patrick Galvin to the podium.
Oh my goodness, it is so good to be outside my Zoom box today to see you. I have heard so many wonderful things about this Rotary Club over the years that it is truly an honor to be here today. And for those of you who are watching on Zoom, thank you for attending and taking some time. We are in an interesting time. I think all of our clubs, I'm a 10-year member of the Rotary Club of Portland, we're all emerging from this pandemic, and I'm confident we're going to be in a better spot after it's all through. We are really fortunate to be Rotarians. And I say this for a couple of reasons. One, I am extremely grateful for all the friends I've made over the past decade through Rotary. And also, I am very, very grateful for the opportunity I've had to serve my community in Portland, as well as the world through my donations to my trust, to all of the wonderful projects that Rotary does internationally. So please, contribute if you can. It really makes a difference. The other thing that I wanted to really point out that is important for me as a Rotarian is wisdom. The wisdom that I've gained from being a Rotary Club member. Today, the wisdom that I'm going to talk to you about is the 4-way test. And I'm going to share how the 4-way test has enabled me and millions of people to lead a better life in terms of how we trust ourselves, as well as how we have trust in our Rotarians, our work colleagues, our friends, our family members, and acquaintances. And specifically, I want to point out how the 4-way test can guide us. It can guide us in our thoughts, words, and actions so we lead an ethical life and in so doing, inspire others to do the same. I'm passionate about this topic, and I think the best way to begin is to actually go back to the past, to see how the 4-way test was born 90 years ago in 1932. 1932, 3 years into the Great Depression. It was a very tough time in our country. Unemployment was 25%. If you think things are tough today, travel back in time. Lots of people unable to feed their families, lots of homelessness, lots of desperation. Millions of Americans lost their life savings, thousands of banks failed. In the lower left-hand corner, you see my fair city of Portland, Oregon. That's the Willamette River, and there are homeless camps, not just on the east side, but on the west side of that river. The homelessness that we're experiencing in Portland, that you're seeing in Seattle, pales in comparison to what was being experienced in 1932. So this country has been through tough times before, and we've always emerged stronger. And I'm convinced it'll happen now, but when we look at 1932, it wasn't universal suffering. There were people doing just fine in 1932, and one of them was this gentleman here, Herbert J. Taylor. In 1932, Herbert Taylor was a 39-year-old executive with one of the biggest tea companies in the world, and he was just on a stellar upward trajectory in his company. And he's in his office one day, and he gets a phone call from a director at Continental National Bank saying, "Herbert, I have a challenge for you." You see, the bank was worried that one of the companies that they had lent a lot of money to was going to go under, and they needed an executive to come in and save the day. And Herbert Taylor agreed to go down and take a look. The company was called Club Aluminum Products. They distributed cookware. They didn't manufacture, they distributed cookware. And he looked at it, and it was in dire distress. It was actually worse than when he initially visited it, because when he accepted the presidency and really got access to the books, he discovered he had to lend the company $6,100 of his own money to keep it afloat so they can make payroll. And on top of that, they were behind in paying their vendors. They had a poor reputation in the marketplace. Things did not look good for Club Aluminum Products, and he did not have much time to save the company. So what did he do? Well, he couldn't outcompete other cookware distribution companies on product mix. He didn't have money to get new products in. And he couldn't compete on price. Prices were cut to the bone in 1932. You were just barely scraping by. So what he saw as an opportunity for his company would be to develop a reputation as the most ethical business in his sphere. So to do that, what he did is he went out and looked at all these company core value statements and codes of ethics, and nothing resonated. It was all too complicated. It sounded too academic. It didn't really speak to him. So he's in his office late one night praying, and he has a vision. And you're actually looking at the vision to my left here. And the vision was what we know as Rotarians as the four-way test. It is unchanged from that night in 1932 when he wrote it down. 24 words. 24 words, unchanged. So when Herbert Taylor came up with this, he looked at it and he thought he had something, but he realized he couldn't roll it out into his company if he didn't live these values on a daily basis himself. So he gave himself a couple of months. A week after coming up with this four-way test, his advertising manager comes into his office and shows him some copies saying, "Hey, what do you think about this?" It had great graphics, looked really good. And in that advertising, it says, "Club Aluminum Products makes the world's best and distributes the world's best cookware." And he looks at it and says, "Come on, that's not true. Our products are good, but they're really no better than the competition. That's hyperbole. You can't do that." And the advertising manager walks out, kind of his head between his legs, going, "Okay." And a week later, his sales manager comes in, really happy to have an order for 50,000 utensils. That was a big order for his company at the time. He looks at the distributor ordering that product, and he says, "That's a problem, because this is a guy who's unfairly undercutting our competition. We had agreed upon a certain price structure. We can't sell to him." And he kept doing this over 2 months, grading everything he was doing against the standard of the four-way test. And he found so much value in it that he invited in his division managers to show him the statement. Now, he wanted to make sure that his values as a Christian were not so imbued in this that the people in this company who weren't Christians could accept it. And his division manager said, "No, this is true to my faith, it's true to my belief system, we can roll with this." Long story short, after about 7 years, the company turned itself around. It became one of the most profitable companies in his niche. Because of his business success and acumen, Rotary International invited him to become a director. And in 1954 and 55, he was our international president. And when he was international president, he deeded the copyright of the four-way test to Rotary International. And the rest you could say is history. So the four-way test, you'll find it if you travel to Thailand. There's a park where you see it right on a monument. It's all over the world. It's this really powerful statement. Walgreens uses the four-way test as its ethical code of conduct. Other companies do too. A lot of people don't know these things. And when I first saw the four-way test as a Rotarian in 2012, I realized that it's something I should have been aware of earlier. You see, when I started my company in 2004, I didn't have an ethical code of conduct. One of the first decisions I faced was someone who wanted to pay us on retainer a good amount of money when our cash flow was poor. And I hemmed and I hawed. The company was a manufacturer of nutraceuticals, pharmacological products that supposedly have a natural base to them, and he had this wonder pill that was going to save the world, and it sounded too good to be true. Well, when he sent us the data, it was actually very exaggerated. The study group was small. It wasn't everything that he had told me when you really kind of dug into it and talked to people about it. And I'm not proud to admit it took me a couple of weeks before I said, you know what, we can't take you on as a client. If I had had the four-way test in my mind, it would have been an easy decision. Because what they wanted us to say wasn't the truth. It wasn't going to be fair to all concerned. It wasn't going to build goodwill and better friendships in terms of our relationship with the people we'd be marketing to, and it wouldn't be beneficial. Easy to make that decision. When we have something as simple and as clear as the four-way test, it's like having an ethical pair of glasses. We can measure what it is that we're going to do. So I have found it to be incredibly useful over the last decade as I've faced key decisions in my company. I ask myself, is this true to the four-way test? And if it isn't, I won't do it. I've also found it very useful in other spheres of my life. I was membership chair of my club for 2 years, the Rotary Club of Portland. And I don't know how it works here in Seattle, but you become membership chair if they're talking about who should be membership chair and you forget to step backwards, then you are the membership chair. So that's how I stepped into, without moving, into the membership role. And as membership chair, I learned that the number one question that people had for me was, hey, Patrick, if I join this Rotary Club, is it going to be great for my business? Am I going to get a lot of leads? And I knew the answer they wanted to hear was, yeah, Rotary is great for business. And Rotary is great for business, but if people are joining thinking it's going to be great for business, it won't be, because they're going to be coming on strong. They're going to be trying to close deals and do things. Rotary is about fellowship, it's about service, it's about trust, and when people have that, business will happen. It might take a long time, but it will happen, but you don't want to join for that reason. For me, it was very easy to tell these prospective members, don't join our club if you're looking for business leads, because I was thinking about the four-way test. That statement was imbued with this knowledge that for me as membership chair to be responsible, I couldn't try to recruit people into my club for business reasons. I'm relying on the four-way test a lot now in my personal life. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and like a lot of 13-year-olds, she thinks she has all of the answers. It's kind of scary. And I'm not with her in the 8th grade. And there's a lot of ethical decisions that an 8th grader faces. There are the mean girls. You know, do I want to be part of that group? Do I want to cut some corners? There's too much cheating going on in her school. And I've asked her to really think about the four-way test and embrace the four-way test and how she lives her life, and it's made her a better person. Some people say it's too simple, but I say if we don't have something like the four-way test, what is it that we're going to base our decisions on? So when I talk about this, people say, well, why are you so interested in this thing from 1932? Why are you going around and traveling and talking about it? So I have a vested interest in this, and it really stems from my own background as a writer. So in 2016, I wrote a parable called The Connector's Way. And it's a story of a business owner who's trying to become successful and grow his third-generation company through sales and advertising. He forgets that the roots of the company were all about relationship building. He moves away from that. And he comes back to it because through the course of the story, he meets mentors who show him a relationship-centric way to grow his business. They teach him tactical things, both some new age things on how he could use digital to just some more standard best practices. And what's been interesting is in the last 5 years, I've traveled all over the place. The book's sold about 40,000 copies, so I've had a lot of reader feedback. And I've had some people say, I've used some of these ideas and they've really helped me grow my business. And I've had other readers say, I tried some of those ideas and they didn't work. And I've always wondered, well, why is that? And then talking to these readers, what I've learned is that if people try to do relationship building to grow a business, and they don't have a foundation of trust, relationship building is seen as manipulation. You're trying to get people to buy your stuff, to give you a lead, to do something for you without having earned that, and trust is earned over time. So I realized that I had a miss in my first book, that I didn't talk about trust enough. So I needed a new book, and this is my new book, The Trusted Way. And I didn't have to look very far for what I was going to build this book around, which was the four-way test. So in this story, it's about a young entrepreneur whose sole goal is to make as much money as he can in the shortest amount of time. And if he has to cut some corners, hey, it happens. Now, that story is looking pretty bad for this guy until he meets some characters, some mentors, and most of them happen to be Rotarians. And they not only tell him about this four-way test, but he sees in their lives, both their personal and professional lives, how they've used the four-way test to guide them. So by the end of the story, he turns himself around. There is a happy ending for him. And I wanted to include, because I wanted to use this as an outreach to get more people interested in Rotary, that story I told you about Herbert Taylor, that's at the back part of the book, so people know where this is coming from. And I'm happy to say that the book is raising money for the Rotary International Foundation, which is an awesome foundation. You can get it on Amazon Kindle, and we got some here if you're interested in getting some signed copies. So that's the story that I wanted to share with you today about the four-way test and about why I'm coming at it the way I am. And I think that if you believe that the four-way test is powerful, it's not enough just to look at it on the banner when you're here with your friends and fellow Rotarians who believe in it, but to take it out into the world. So one thing that has really convinced me that this is a powerful thing is in our club we have a very active U40 program, an under 40 program. So we are attracting in younger members. The past 4 years I've been a mentor to a different young Rotarian every year. And when I talk to them about the four-way test, it's a revelation. They've never heard about it before. Honestly, outside of Rotary, no one's really heard about the four-way test. And I share my stories of how it's had an impact on me, how it's improved my life, and I've seen some of them now use it in their decision-making, and I've seen some really good things result. So I'm passionate about this knowledge and the need that we have to get it outside of the walls of our meetings. And I think that as Rotarians, if we're going to be taking this message out into the world, we need to do it with confidence of not having this banner next to us, but having this really instilled in our brain. So I want to share with you very quickly in my remaining time how you can remember the four-way test without ever having to see it in writing. Have any of you read this book, Moonwalking with Einstein? This is a fabulous, a couple of hands, a fabulous book. It came out 10 years ago. It's by a guy named Joshua Foer. Joshua Foer was assigned to cover the US Memory Championship in 2005. And he went to this event thinking that people were going to be these savants who could remember decks of cards, that could have these just prodigious memories because it was natural ability. And one guy said to him, no, we're memory athletes. If you watch on ESPN, you can actually see the US Memory Championships. And we train in techniques of memory. And Joshua Foer said, it would never work for me. My memory's terrible. Guess what happens? One of these contestants takes him on as a student. A year later, he goes back, not as a journalist, but as a contestant, and he wins. So this book is a story about how a guy with a very average memory developed a great memory, and he talks about various techniques, the most famous being the memory palace technique. I don't have time for it. You can find out more about it on Wikipedia, but here's how it works, and here's how you can use this technique that has been around since the time of the ancient Greeks. When books were hard to come by, the only way you had knowledge is you had to have a way of remembering it. So here's how it works. Take what you want to remember, an abstract concept, translate it into a physical object, and place it into a room that's well known for you, a room in your house. So here's how I remember the four-way test. I think about being in my kitchen and looking up and seeing this giant syringe of truth serum, exaggeratedly large, so exaggerate the image in your mind. So the first part of the four-way test, is it the truth? Right, okay. So I leave my kitchen, and then I walk into my dining room, and I have this little Ferris wheel on the dining room table. And this is a mnemonic technique, too. Is it fair to all concerned? And then I leave my kitchen. I'm going on a little tour of my house here, and I go into the living room, and what do I see trundling down my front street? That's right, a Goodwill truck. And the third principle being, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And then lastly, I leave my living room and I go into my family room. We have a blackboard in there, and there are two words written down on the blackboard, and they are win-win, and it reminds me of the fourth principle. Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Now, this is an amazing technique. I have been using it actually throughout this speech. I have notes here. I haven't been looking at them because as I've been talking to you, I've been touring my home. So if you're ever asked to speak, give this a try. You can remember a ton of data with this technique. And if you want to learn more about the history of memory and why it's important to remember things, as opposed to having everything on your phone, I highly recommend this book. So, with that, I want to open this up to some questions and maybe some shares that you might have of the four-way test. But before doing that, I want to just end with this thought. All you have to do is go onto the web to your favorite news website, right, left, center, it doesn't matter what your ideology is, and you will find companies, individuals, governments making some ethically suspect choices. And I believe that one of the big reasons why that happens is people don't have an ethical code of conduct. They don't have a four-way test. The four-way test is powerful, and it needs to go beyond this room. It needs to go beyond Rotary, because I firmly believe that if the four-way test got out there into the world and people truly lived by it and shared it, we would be in a much better spot. So with that, I just thank you for your attention, the time you've given me, and I'm going to open this up for any questions or thoughts you all might have. Thank you. So a share of a four-way test, I'd love to hear a story of someone who's had an impact on their life because of the four-way test.
Well, if there's no questions in the room, I'm going to start with one on Zoom.
Oh, good. Okay.
You're being asked the question, if there was a fifth test,
A fifth part?
What would it be?
So for me, it's are you sharing, like share your wisdom. It's not enough to have an ethical code of conduct that guides you. I think the world right now is in such a place that we need this to be on a much bigger stage than just the 1.2 million, 47,000 Rotary clubs of the world. So I would add a fifth element, which is, are you sharing your knowledge?
So let me pick up on that. You mentioned before schools and your 13-year-old.
Yes.
How could we possibly get this into all schools? How do we get it out of, you said that it's a Rotary thing, and nobody's ever heard of it, maybe unless they've read your book. How do we flood that out into something else, particularly schools?
So back in the day, when Herbert Taylor was president of RI, and in the 60s and 70s, it was pretty common for Rotary clubs to have four-way test speech contests. I don't know any clubs in Oregon that are doing that currently. I've heard of some in the South and the center part of the country that are doing it, but we've fallen away from it. I think speaking is a great way to internalize content. So having speech contests built around the four-way test and having middle schoolers, I think would be great, high schoolers talking about it. So I think we could sponsor things, and I'm interested in doing that in our club in Portland. Yes.
This room does not have any questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All
This
right, we've
room
got
doesn't
more.
have any questions.
The Zoom is flooding. The Zoom is just going out of control.
All right.
The memory
let's go.
technique is also featured. Oh, who cares? Oh, that's not very nice. Sorry, Faith. I should have read on. That's not a question. What didn't you tell us today that you really want to tell us?
What didn't I tell you?
Yeah, there's got to be more. You've got a third book in the works. I know you do.
Well, everything has the word way in it, so I'm very derivative. And I think that I've talked about relationships in terms of ones that companies are building and ones that people are building with one another. But I really see a need for talking about how relationships are built on teams right now as we come back into the post-COVID world and we're all navigating the challenge of hybrid versus real world and people coming in a couple days a week. I think there needs to be a lot coming out on how people can build relationship and connection in this new world. And we're not going back to 2019. So my new book is going to really dive into that deeply. Yes.
So in our professional careers, we have encountered more often than not people who tend to go towards the dark path of ethics. What have you found to be the most efficient strategy in your professional experience to bring them towards, the four-way test and, more ethical paths?
That's a really good question.
Great question.
I think I've been embracing Stoicism in the past year. I think Stoicism is a great practice for the pandemic, which is focus on the controllables, what you actually have agency over. So I think leading by example and on the people within the organization you can have an impact on, sharing it with them. Conversion is difficult. Converting an adult who has a wayward path is tough. And I think it can be very frustrating. I'm not saying it's not worth, bringing this to their attention, but I think the only thing we can be sure of is our own ethical, our own value system. And there are people that we can have an impact on. So I think life is short, focus on the people who you actually can change.
All right, last question. In addition to the book you're working on, what other Rotary activities do you have on your calendar coming up?
Okay.
You're going to be in Houston, I think, is that
Yes, I'm going to be in Houston. So Catherine and I were talking about this. We both got emails as attendees reassuring us, we've registered, that it is going to happen. I was registered for Taiwan and they kind of pulled the rug out. And I understand that some people are wary to sign up. It's going to be in Texas, so Texas is not going to stop it. I can tell you for sure Texas will not stop it, and Rotary's not going to stop it. It needs to happen. Face-to-face cannot be replaced with Zoom. I've been to one international convention in Brazil. I spoke there. It was a wonderful experience. I think your perception of our organization will change so much when you have an opportunity to meet Rotarians, not just from the US, but from around the world. We have a really powerful network out there, and I think it's just sad to be a Rotarian and not avail yourself of the opportunity to meet Rotarians from all over the world. So please go there. I'd love to see you there. Thank you.
All right, a real warm thank you for Patrick.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Patrick, in appreciation of your visiting our club today, we have a donation of over 600 servings of healthy produce made by Harvest Against Hunger. It'll support families in need through our local food banks.
Excellent. I love that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.